Cue intro. Bah, bah, bah. What are we doing today for you, man? Bit of a tidy up?
Yeah, a little bit of just, I think I want to get the mullet in a little bit more.
Yeah.
So maybe tighten up
Scissors,
the
though. We'll do
sides a little
scissors,
bit.
no clippers and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like that.
no
Pretty
clip.
much
I
how
don't
it
need
is
a
now,
fade
but
or
just,
anything.
yeah, just
I think so,
tight.
yeah. A little bit off the back.
Yep.
Keep the fringe if that's cool.
Yep. Bro, of course, we've introduced each other. Who are you? What do you do with Top Blokes, man?
Yeah, so my name's Isaac. I'm a youth worker in Top Blokes Foundation. That means that I'm working hands-on with the young people in the schools.
How long have you been doing that for?
A bit over 2 years now.
Loving it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a job that I didn't know existed, and now that I'm in it, I couldn't imagine doing something that's not in this type of work.
For one, what drew you to it? And two, what made you kind of stick around? Like, what you kind of fell in love with?
Yeah, I was drawn in by glimpses of seeing vulnerability in young people and remembering what I was like at their age, that sort of like 15-year-old, kind of year 9 and 10 in high school, and how much you've got going on at that age. And I was inspired by my ability to potentially like encourage some of that vulnerability and be a bit of a mentor and have challenging conversations in a safe space.
And it's great what Top Blokes does with certain topics to kind of help educate young men about, masculinity and sexual health and pornography and stuff like that. And today we're here to, of course, to discuss a little bit about pornography. Could you give us like a bit of a broad scope of what that kind of looks like in terms of how you guys educate that?
Yeah, absolutely. Pornography is one of the more challenging conversations that we facilitate with the young guys. It comes later in the program, so we've built up enough rapport. There's a little bit healthier relationships with the young guys. We're able to, know their names, have a laugh with them. They feel comfortable amongst their peers in the setting. So it's at a point where we can hold that conversation because it's a pretty confronting one to have.
Yeah.
Either it's too awkward to have, or they just take they just laugh about it and don't take it seriously.
For sure. If you come too red hot out of the gate, just being like, let's talk about porn. Like, they're going to be like, oh. Yeah, 100%. I totally understand.
So the difference in the Top Blokes program is that, we have built that rapport because it's a, long-term program. We get to have like multiple weeks with them.
Yeah. And
by that point, they're willing to have a conversation, and actually we do see them taking it seriously. There is an appetite, for like learning more about how it does impact them.
Yeah. How did those conversations kind of start within the program?
We start off by having a conversation around like the age that someone might first view porn, and then compare that to the age that someone might have sex for the first time.
What are those ages? Do we have like an exact kind of age, or is it range?
Yeah, so on average, they're looking at the age of someone watching porn for the first time being around that 13 years of age. And and the average age of someone, having sex for the first time being more toward that 17 sort of years of age.
Yeah.
And we talk about that gap there and the difference and what's going on in that time period. And basically they're learning about sex through porn in that time. Yeah,
hectic. Is there much of a difference between, say, for instance, the influence of the access with the internet to when it wasn't really as accessible, say, for instance, back 2000s or something like that? Like, is there much study around that, or like, discussion around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a huge part of where we go with the conversation. Talking about how at this point in time with, as you said, the internet and porn being accessible on the internet, there aren't very many barriers for people to be accessing this like highly stimulating, there's a lot like very intense material. There's not a lot of barriers between them and accessing that intense material online. And so go back 20 years and people were, looking at porn through magazines and things like that.
Yeah.
And then by the time they were at age of maybe having their first sexual experience, they hadn't actually consumed that much porn, and definitely not the stuff that people are consuming now.
Yeah.
Whereas these guys that we work with are coming in at age where they first see it, and it's the most extreme stuff that's accessible.
Yeah.
And then that's informing what they go into their sexual encounters with.
And that pretty much, it creates this base of, what's that word, kind of desensitizes them to, you know, they think this is the reality. This is what, you know, especially ladies want, or this is how it's meant to go down with that. So yeah, how are you guys combating that? What's some kind of conversations around to educate these guys on, like, you know, to steer them away from that?
Addressing it from the scope of we want to talk about this because we know people are engaging with it. Like, I think that's a big approach of Top Blokes. Similarly, when we talk about alcohol and other types of drugs, we're acknowledging that people are going to engage with these behaviours or substances, for various different reasons. And so porn's no different. We want to acknowledge that people are watching it. You know, though it's not legally under the age of 18, they can't be accessing it. But we know that they most likely
They've
are.
got access to it,
And we want to talk about how might that be impacting them. So we're going to cover things like how it might impact you physically, how might it impact you psychologically, and then also how does that play into intimate relationships or future intimate relationships that young people might want to have.
What's some examples of some physical effects or some mental effects that pornography can have on these young adults?
There are studies around it. At the moment, there haven't been a huge amount of studies done, but what we do share based on the current studies in the workshops is around comparing it to something like aggression found in young people who play like violent video games and watch violent movies and things like that, compared to young people who are viewing like more extreme types of porn or even violent or aggressive porn. We're actually seeing higher levels of aggression in those that are consuming that porn compared to the movies and the video games, which is a bit alarming.
So they just like lash out, more fights, more like, you know, talking back, that kind of stuff, or not being able to control their emotion as much?
I think it's more toward that what is set as an example for them isn't a good one. They're not shown how to communicate healthily in an intimate situation through porn. They're not taught how to have difficult conversations around what someone might be okay with, what their boundaries are. Consent is definitely not shown in porn, and if it is given in porn, the guys aren't seeing it because it's not part of the content that they're seeing. And those are huge issues. So it really shows up in relationships, and that's where the issues are, I feel. So we don't see a lot of consent in porn, and then that's reflecting in young people's education. As I said earlier, you know, there's like 3 or 4 years where they're learning about sex and intimacy through this porn. That's highly unrealistic. Part of that is that they're not seeing someone have a conversation. To them, learning about consent is very, very limited, and it's not verbal, it's not open, and there isn't a lot of space for someone to set boundaries or say no to things because they're not seeing that. Other areas where it's kind of leading young people, I guess, astray or letting them down when it comes to intimacy is around condom use. It's just not in the culture in the porn that they're seeing. And that is reflecting in young people. Like, less people are wearing condoms because of that, and we're seeing resurgence of STIs that haven't been around as much. They're sort of becoming more prevalent because of that influence.
I wouldn't even really think about that as well too. Like, you know, porn doesn't really depict, like, you know, that like sexual health, like wearing condoms and stuff like that, or also realizing, you know, like how much behind the scenes kind of goes to actually prepare these scenes, right? Like, you know, not to go too in depths of like, you know, how these things are created, but out of my own curiosity, like, you know, hearing how porn's actually made is so unnatural. And a lot of these, young adults that are watching it, to realize, like, you know, how much is just made up, how much is just, you know, forced to desensitize, but also stimulate to a high degree, right? So they're always, it's kind of like how we get so addicted to scrolling on TikTok or Instagram. They're always here trying to get more out of you. So it's kind of like, fighting this constant battle to kind of, you know, break this addiction or break this kind of like influence. When they're always trying to throw this in their face. How do you guys feel that response with the young adults? Like, when you do come in, they're like, oh, do they feel a little bit kind of like, oh, these guys are accepting, I'm more willing to listen?
Yeah, I like that question. Yeah, talking about shame, that's a big point, and I think reducing stigma and shame are a massive goal of ours at Top Blokes, regardless of the conversation that we're having with the young guys. Yeah, and the way that we do that is through understanding and empathy and acknowledging the current climate that these guys are growing up in. You know, it's not really conducive for them to be aware of how to give consent, how to ask for consent, how to have conversations, how to have safe sex practices, because they're not learning it properly. They're learning it through porn. So we do come in there and say, hey guys, we understand that you guys are growing up with this. Chances are you haven't learnt about sex through any other way. So having that empathy, not creating shame for anyone who may be dependent on porn or addicted. Technically, porn isn't coming into the category of things that are chemically addictive, but behaviourally, we do see a lot of people becoming dependent on it for various reasons, and we do relate it back to mental health a bit as well.
Yeah.
Someone might be struggling through anxiety or feeling isolated. They might tend to reach for something that makes them feel better, and we do see them doing that through porn. And at the end of the day, porn is distilling down a relationship or intimacy into something that's really far from why people might engage in intimacy in the first place, which is connection.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing connection in porn, and so young people aren't learning about the importance of that, and they're kind of going after things that aren't really what relationships are about. If we look at our relationship workshop that we do earlier in the program, it's really foundational that we set that up for them, talking about like communication, consent, and healthy boundaries and all that sort of stuff. And then when we have the conversation around porn, we're able to compare the two and say, this is what we're looking for. This is definitely not what we're seeing.
Yeah. All right, man, we're finishing up here. You can't see it, it looks fantastic. There's no mirrors around here, but is there anything you want to leave us with, wrapping up this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to reflect on the conversation around connection. Earlier in our Top Blokes program, we have conversations with the young guys around healthy relationships, and connection comes up as something that they actually really value. They talk about the traits that they want to see in a healthy relationship, and what we're hearing is things like communication, consent. They want to have respect and they want to have boundaries. Then later, when we have this conversation around porn, we acknowledge that they're not seeing those things in the porn that they're watching, and so it really isn't modeling what connection looks like in an intimate setting. So if they haven't engaged in sexual intimacy before, they're not really set up well to look for connection as their primary reason for engaging with it. Connection is something that we want to encourage the boys to value, and I think we can do that in a healthy way through the environment that we create and the safe space where we're not creating any shame around people's connection with porn. But we do encourage them to maybe question why they're using it and how it might be impacting themselves or other people in their lives. There's 3 C's that we talk about not being present in porn. So they're not learning about communication, they're not learning about consent, and they're not learning about condom use. And then connection is another one that we add in there as something we want to encourage them to value. So that's really some of the key takeaways, that if they're learning about sex through porn, they're not learning about the importance of those 3 C's. And as a result, they're not being set up for successful relationships. So we really want to change the direction of that and change the conversations that they get to have as young guys.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing that. See you in the next one, huh?
Thanks.